All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and we've been going over the PowerPoint presentations for JavaScript 6th edition, the Web Warrior series by Wagner and Gosselin. I've just finished lecturing on Chapter 5, which talked all about the DOM, or the Document Object Model. So for this lecture, I've gone out to W3 schools, and what I'm going to do during this lecture is talk about the HTML DOM object stuff and the JavaScript HTML DOM. All right. Notice again, we mentioned this before. In the DOM, everything is a node. The document is a node. All the elements are nodes. All the attributes are nodes. The text are nodes. They're different kinds of nodes. The document is a document node. Every element that's in there, all the ULs, etc., H1 tags, all of those are element nodes. Anytime that you have an element like, for example, an image element will have a source attribute, and an image element will have an alt attribute. It also may or may not have a height attribute and a width attribute. Those are all attribute nodes. All right? The text that you put in, so for example, the text that's inside of an H1 tag, that's a text node. If you put comments in HTML, those are comment nodes. So, as mentioned here, the DOM, it's built for you. I don't know if the browser builds it or what, but it's built for you. It's invisible, but it's something that you can manipulate. So, when an HTML document is loaded into a browser, it becomes the document object. That's the root node of the HTML document. As it said, it provides properties and methods to allow you to access the node objects. The document object, or DOM, is part of the window object, or the BOM. Some of the document objects and methods that you'd use most often, as you can see here as I perused my way through, that's probably 20 or 30. We looked at some of these, but not most of them. So as it says, the following properties and methods can be used on HTML objects. Now, if you want to know how to use these, you highlight one of them, which brings you to that page, and then there's examples. So, for instance, if I click this, it says 3. What's 3? That's the number of anchor tags I have in here. So the code says, find out the length of this document anchors array and give it to me. Since there's 3 tags, the length is 3. We're not asking the attribute names. Those would be 0, or the values rather, those would be 0, 1, and 2. Now, if you notice and we look in here, in the W3C DOM core, the document object inherits all properties and methods from the node object. Many of these make no sense used on documents, so you should avoid using all the ones that you see here. So, I'm going to walk through most of this section that's in here. We just talked about the DOM document. Now we'll talk about the DOM element. Then we'll talk about DOM attributes, DOM events, and DOM style. All right, so the element object, as it says, you already saw that. Everything is a node. The element object represents an HTML elements. Those elements can have child nodes, and those child nodes can be another element, so you can have an element within an element. You can have text within an element, or a comment within an element. So as mentioned here, a node list object is a list of nodes. Some of the properties that you can use to manipulate HTML elements are shown here. Again, what do we have? 20, 30, 40, whatever. So if I want to grab one of these, for example, element.nextSibling, get the content of the next sibling of a list item. Okay? So what we're asking for is, we're saying we're here and we want the content of the next item. All right. Now you might say big deal, whatever. But again, you can potentially manipulate any of this arithmetically. All right. Let's make another list item in here. That'll be item 3. You've got coffee, you've got tea, so let's put in milk, and that will be the third LI. All right. So if we come in there and we say change that to item 2, now we're asking for the next sibling for item 2. We're getting the same answer. I don't know if it allows you to save here. Functions throw white space. If you add white space, it'll be undefined. Did I add any white space? No, I did not. They should be correct. Again, we may not be able to, well, let's try it this way. Let's grab all this. Let's start up a new document. Put that in there. I'm just going to save this. This is their stuff, so I'm going to literally call this W3 schools dom.html. All right, now let's run it and see what we get. Milk. Okay, so it is correct. We were able to put in our own element. Now, we can also put in our own element, and we can put it in programmatically, and I don't know if they get into that in here or not. So that property we just looked at, that next sibling, as it says, returns the node immediately following whatever node is active. There's a previous sibling we could have used to return the one up above it. So for instance, I believe at least, if I come back here and I change this, make it a lot smaller here. All right, so let's say previous here. Okay, so we're using previous sibling. Let's run that. All right, we're currently at tea. Coffee is the one before it. Now, again, just looking at that, you might think, well, big, hairy deal. No, it is, because of the different stuff that you're able to do with this. It is a big deal. We're talking about going in and programmatically manipulating the content of a web page. Again, to either insert new content, update existing content, or delete existing content. So if you did that, that shows you the interactivity of JavaScript. You could literally be interacting with a web page, where the web page would almost seem to be communicating with you. So if you were building something where it said, you know, list your favorite hobbies or something, and you were building them, and every time you grab something or put in something yourself, it would add it to your page. Oh, I spelled that wrong, so you could change it. Oh, I really don't like that anymore, so you could remove it, type of an idea. The DOM attribute object, again, that's any kind of attributes. You use attr for the attribute object. Again, here are the properties and methods. You notice there are not as many of them. The key one is probably going to be attr value. You can set the value. All right, here we're grabbing the value and we're copying it to a variable. So we're getting the value and copying it. If instead of doing this, if we didn't have the var x, if we said, for example, alert this, then that would be, you know, we could get the value that way. We can also set the value. All right. Click the button to display the value of the button's first attribute, my function. This stuff probably doesn't make a boatload of sense and probably won't make a boatload of sense until you go in and really take a look at it. They give you a warning here that these are some older properties that it's not recommended that you use anymore. You know, things evolve. It's kind of like when you look at the HTML elements and the ones that have been deprecated over time. The idea is the same. All right, DOM events. As it says, allow JavaScript to register different event handlers. These are some big ones. The on events are pretty big. On click, you've seen this kind of thing before. Button on click equal my function. So when you click the button, you call this function. So what does it do? It puts hello world on there. We could put anything we wanted. This shows a way that you can change. That should have worked. Again, I believe that if I grab this, let's just use the one we've been using here and paste that in. Save. Run, click, Rankin Technical College. All right. I can't underscore enough to you just what a terrific reference W3 Schools is. All right. There are mouse events, there are keyboard events, there are object events, there are form events. We're going to look at these in a little more depth in the next chapter. There's drag events, clipboard events, print events, media events, animation events, transition events, server sent events, miscellaneous events, touch events, which will be for mobile devices, the event objects, properties, methods, mouse event object. I mean, look, it doesn't end almost. So this would be a page as you're starting to look at this stuff to become a little bit more expert in it that I would take a good look at. All right, there's also a DOM style object. You can create style objects. You can set style objects. So again, you've already seen this one or example like it. Changes the text to red. Can we change it to something else? Aqua. Well, what you'll notice again, as I've been doing, if I paste that in and launch it, oops, I guess I didn't save. It's Aqua. All right. I don't consider myself at all an expert in this. I'm constantly learning. All right, but again, as I'm constantly learning, sometimes the best way is to just keep going through this stuff. All right, so they start to go through the different HTML objects. I'm not going to go through those because there's probably around 100 of them, but you've seen these already. All right, so that was the HTML DOM. Let's talk for a minute or two about JavaScript HTML DOM. All right. Again, when a web page is loaded, the browser creates the DOM, the document object model for the page. It creates this. You don't see it, but it creates it. With the object model, JavaScript gets all the power it needs to create dynamic HTML. The bottom line is, if you look at this, I'm not going to read this, but most of the stuff in here says, again, to add new content, update existing content, or remove existing content. Can also react to different events on the page and create new events. So this is a tutorial that goes over all of this. I'm going to step through it, but very quickly. In the tutorial, again, add and delete, change, and react to. So again, we've already talked about the DOM. As it says, it defines a standard for accessing documents. My guess is this right here that you see in blue is taken right out of the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. The DOM standard is separated into three different parts. The core DOM, which is the standard model for all document types, XML, which is for the extensible markup language documents, and the HTML DOM, which is kind of what we just looked at. All right, so again, the HTML DOM is a standard object and programming interface for HTML. The elements are objects. It defines those. It defines the properties, the methods, and the events. The DOM methods are the actions or behaviors you can perform on these elements. Remember, we're talking objects here, and objects are made up of methods, which are behaviors, and properties, which are also known as attributes or data. The DOM programming interface, as it says, you can access it with JavaScript. All elements are objects. I just mentioned to you what a property was and what a method was. So if I create a paragraph like this, and you've seen this before, I can create a paragraph and I can put it on a page. Then I can fill it with JavaScript. All right, so there it is. The key thing, though, is I'm adding the data using JavaScript. All right, so I'm changing the inner HTML of the paragraph by using the getElementById. I could change this to something else, but I could ask the user information, then I could generate this programmatically based on that information. I could say, what's your name? I put in Jeff Scott, and it comes up, hello, Jeff Scott. All right, or it could ask me information about something I was interested in, whatever that happened to be. We already went over the getElementById method, and the inner HTML property is kind of neat. It's the easiest way to get content or set content for an element. So I could, for example, I could get the content of a paragraph. That's what we just saw. I could set it. That's actually what we just saw. And you can do it any place. You can add, update, or remove content in a list item, in a paragraph, in an H1 tag, anything that has an ID associated with it, that has content. As it says, it's useful for getting or replacing the content of HTML elements. The document object we've talked about already. So in the chapter, we went over the getElementById, we went over the getElementsByTagName, we went over the getElementsByClassName. All right? You can use inner HTML to change something. As far as content, you can use the attribute value to change the value of an attribute. All right? You can also use set attribute, and you can change the styling. We've looked at all of these. We looked at how you add a new element. All right? How you remove an existing element. So as it says, this adds an element to an on-click event. So whatever the ID is in here, for example, if that was a button, that would say when you click the button, you want this function to run. The first DOM, as it says, 1998, so we're coming up on 20 years. It defined 11 HTML objects, object collections, and properties, which are still valid today. The DOM 3 added more. So here's some. Again, you see that some of them are deprecated or obsolete, which means they should no longer be used. These are not hyperlinked, so you're not going to get examples of them. JavaScript, HTML, DOM elements. Again, finding elements by ID we've already looked at. Now, if we do this, all right, we're grabbing whatever is in there, whatever is associated with that, and we're saving it to a local variable. Why? So we've got that local variable that we can now programmatically manipulate. It's kind of an alias for it, for lack of better words. So here's an example. We already looked at get element by ID, which finds just an element. This would find all paragraph tags. So as it says, if we look here, you notice we've got 4 paragraphs, and it finds all of them. If I come in here and add a new paragraph, and I go back and run this, you notice that it found everything, including the 2 that I just entered. Again, that represents the get elements, multiple, plural by tag name, and it's returning them basically as an array. Okay? So there's the examples. We can also grab things by class name. So notice I've got classes set here, and it shows me those. So everything with a class name of intro. That's got intro and that's got intro. And we're showing the first one. If we change this, so again, if we grab this, and we ask for number 1 here and save it, it should give us this one. And you can see that it does. All right. We could even do more manipulation than that. Remember, it doesn't necessarily have to just be a paragraph. All right. So if we came in here, let's come in here with an H1 tag with a class equal to intro. All right. And this is an H1 tag with a class of intro. All right. Now we could say the first H1 with a class of intro, and that would be there's 0, there's 1, so that's now 2. And ideally, if I'm running this correctly, this should come back and give us this. All right, we'll see if I did it correctly or not. This is an H1 tag with a class of intro. All right. There's actually displaying it, but this is it right here. All right. Hopefully you're starting to realize some of the power in using this stuff. You can find elements by using class selectors. So these are all paragraphs, p tag, dot intro. So that's all paragraphs that have a class of intro. You can work with object collections. So you can iterate your way through. And notice there's other objects. So if I want all of the images, for example. Okay? This would come in here and count the number of images I have. You change HTML, okay, says in JavaScript, document.write can be used to write directly to the screen. We've seen that before. But I can change inner HTML. This is an important concept. All right? Why? Because what it says right here is our original paragraph looks like this. All right? And we're telling it to go in there and change it to this. So again, if I grab this example, I can make this say anything I want. So there's my new text. Again, you start to think about some of the ramifications and some of the things that you can do with this. Right? Here's an example where, as it says, we're changing the text that's in a header. Very similar to what we just looked at. But instead of changing paragraph text, we're changing a header text. We can change attribute values. Very important, because what we're doing is we're actually changing what's here from a landscape. We're going to change it, or from a smiley face, I guess, to a landscape. So you could change, again, you could ask the user for some information, show a default image based on the result of what they gave you to the answer to the question. You could change the image accordingly. For example, there's always exercises at the bottom of these. I'd strongly suggest, if you get the time, that you take a look at them. You can also change CSS. So here, we're coming in and we should have a blue paragraph. All right? So it's not that it's that big a thing. But without that paragraph, or without that, in there, the paragraph would look just the way that it had looked. All right? So we're changing. Don't know if we can say this or not, but let's try it. I'm going to change the font size. I'm going to try to make it 36 pixels. How's that? We'll change the font style to cursive, and we'll change the font color to orange. Pretty obvious what's happening there? All right. And we are changing this on the fly, interactively, as the program is running. All right. You can work with events. So when you click this, it was the button click that made this turn red. All right? So you could not only use that, but you could change the inner HTML in that too, if you wanted to. Let's see if I can do that. All right, so we've done that. But instead of changing the style and the color, all right, I'm going to try to see if I can change the inner HTML to this is my new H1 text. Okay? Pretty obvious, hopefully, what's going on here. You harness this, and there's a lot of power in this. Okay? All right, next are animations. My first animation. Now, it's not going to be much. My animation will go here. Well, it's not much at all. You create an animation container. You style the animation accordingly. Okay? We haven't put the JavaScript code in yet. I think that comes next. So there's the code. So this is creating an animation using JavaScript. It's pretty obvious, or at least I think it is, what's happening. So you can move things around on a page. You can have things appear to kind of fly onto a page, etc. You can also do this stuff using jQuery. And I think it's easier using a jQuery, so we're going to look at that later. All right, next are events. Mouse over me, see that? Mouse over event, click this. Okay. So you saw some examples of that. Got an H1. When you click on it, oops, okay, kind of silly examples, but they're important as far as what they show. Here's a button that when you click it, shows you the information about the current date. Kind of neat. You know, you could put that on a web page, and if somebody ever wanted the date, you could even come in first and ask them their time zone, and you could give them the date and time based on their time zone. Assigning an on-click to a button, we've done this before. This is important though. Notice what we're doing here. We're not calling the function, but we're assigning that. All right? If we had put there display date paren, it would have called the function. But we're telling it not to call the function until we click the button. All right, so this is setting up a relationship, okay? And it says when you click the button, that's called my button, which is the one that's there. When you click it, the one that says try it, all right, then call the display date. You can see how it keeps constantly updating itself. Onload and on unload is when the page is loaded into or comes out of memory. On change typically is used, as it says, with input fields. Mouse over makes sense, hopefully. Again, not a lot of code. Mouse over me and you see what we get. Mouse down and mouse up. Nothing there, but if I hold the mouse down and then let go. So again, we're having it interact in real time to what's going on. Many more examples in here. Events can also, or have listeners associated with them. Come on. Add an event listener that fires when a user clicks a button. Very similar to the stuff that we just looked at. I'm not going to read these to you. You can see them. But you can make any element react programmatically. So if you wanted an H1 tag to act like a button, so when you clicked on it, something happened, you could do that by adding an event listener to it. All right. So what we're saying here is when you click the button, what you want to have happen is you want an alert to come up that says hello world. Now this is one way you can do it. We've already learned other ways you could do that same thing. You can add several event handlers to the same element. You can add event handlers to the window object. This is kind of interesting. Event bubbling or event capturing. If you do enough work with event listeners, you're going to come up and learn about the terms bubbling and capturing. When you bubble, you go from wherever the event happened and you work your way up. When you capture, you start at the top and you work your way down. So when you bubble, if you can imagine, if we had a picture of the DOM here and something happened, you start right where you are and you work your way up the DOM. Okay? When you capture, when something happens in an element, you go back to the top and you work your way down. All right? Not only can you add listeners, you can remove them. Navigation. Very interesting stuff here. Okay, so if we look at this, the head element there is the child of root. Okay, and I'm not sure if it looks like the body, the head and the body are both elements of the root, for example. So HTML is the root node. It has no parents. It's the parents of head and body. Head is the first child, body is the last child. Head typically has at least one child, the title. The title has one child, and it's a text node. The body, in this case, has two children, an H1 tag and a P tag. Both of them have text nodes. The H1 and the P are at the same level, so they're siblings. So these are different ways that you can work with things. Parent nodes, child nodes, first child, second child, next sibling, previous sibling. And again, there are a few examples here. Not showing a whole heck of a lot. Inner HTML we've already looked at. Okay, so what are we doing here? We're basically spitting back all of this in the HTML. All right, just about finished here. The DOM nodes, again, we looked at this, but these are examples of what was discussed in the PowerPoints. All right, so this is how you can create new elements. That's the this is new here. All right, but if we go back here, okay, there's the one we just added. All right. Again, there are very many detailed examples in here. All right. Finally, we end up here with node list, which is the last one. And a node list is a collection or an array of nodes. So if we wanted all paragraphs, for example, this should give us, we're asking for number 1, so it should give us the DOM is very useful. There it is. All right, I think that's enough for right now. I'm going to come back in just a minute with the next presentation, which is on JavaScript form validation. It's now 7 o'clock. I have students who usually come in by 7:45, so if I don't finish it in that time, I'll have to again break up Chapter 6 into multiple lectures as well.